This time, Dukla Prague. An away kit is for life, not just for Christmas.
No, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Oh, and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, making the case for Oxford United wherever possible and often when not. And joining me as ever, King of the Data, Jamie Rooney.
Graham, hello. I have to start off with two pieces of news. The first one is I've been a bit worried about you, but we'll come to that in a minute. The other one was, I can't remember how many episodes back it was. We did Millwall, and you eulogized about the idea that Chris Kamara, Stan Bowles and Terry Hurlock all played together. They absolutely did. I don't know the total number of games, but I know that Chris Kamara, Cammy himself, unbelievable Jeff, tweeted from his X account some time back that 37 years ago today, I made my Brentford FC debut along Stan Bowles and Terry Hurlock. Absolutely amazing.
What a trio. Difficult to know who the sensible one in that trio is.
Yeah, well, it kind of wouldn't have been Stan Bowles. I'm absolutely sure of that. And that kind of leads me into what I've been worried about. I was so relieved last week when we was with the brilliant David Coates talking about Yeovil Town that you didn't make a reference to superstars because you kind of was on a trend. I think in the QPR one, you made a reference to superstars, and I remember you got quite excited about it as well when Stuart kind of accidentally stumbled upon it, and you just went there. You took the bull by the horns, and then in the Dallas Tornado, that incredible world tour that we talked with Phil Craig about, once again, you were there, a USA American superstars. So last week when Superstars didn't pop up, I was quite disappointed because secretly I do love it myself, especially the theme music. But I was relieved because I was worried that maybe you were going a bit, a little crazy.
I did search whether Phil Jevons had ever made it into the Superstars lineup, but sadly not. But don't you worry, Jamie, there will be plenty more Superstars content coming your way. And it's funny you should mention Dallas Tornadoes. And I should, of course, firstly mention, this is we are going to be doing Dukla Prague this week. But we've got quite a lot of any other business to catch up on. So much, in fact, that we're dedicating the first half of the pod to clearing up all those bits and pieces. So if you were here specifically for the Dukla Prague content, you might want to fast forward to the second half. But I don't recommend that because you want to know more about Dallas Tornadoes, don't you? Because, Jamie, at some point you said one of the members of the tour was Brian Harvey. And you said not the Brian Harvey.
That's correct.
E17. But do you know which Brian Harvey it was?
Oh, my goodness me. No, I don't. And, I'm really intrigued. Put me out of my misery.
Yeah. I know. So that the Brian Harvey, in case, is in fact the brother of Colin Harvey,
yes,
the former Everton midfielder, coach, and ultimately manager.
I'm disappointed in myself because I could have worked that out because obviously we know that a lot of the players were taken from the Merseyside area where Colin Harvey would have been playing his football during that period when that great Everton team. Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful surprise, but I'm disappointed that I didn't consider that. I think I allowed my giddy excitement to blank out any logical thoughts that could have led me to Colin Harvey.
I know. Well, I was impressed to find it. Obviously, finding that information out a week after doing the podcast on it would have been more useful to have found it out at the time, wouldn't it? But there you go. And whilst we're on tours, because obviously Dallas Tornado, fantastic, world-class tour of all. Another tour that we've mentioned previously, and one which almost matches the Dallas Tornadoes one for surrealness, was the great West Bromwich Albion tour to China of 1978, I think it was. And this was fascinating. And we had Ian Ward on, who was brilliant on the podcast. And he was very excitedly reminding us at the time that there was a World in Action documentary about this, which was on, but sadly, the full version of which was not available. And Ian messaged me a couple of weeks ago to say that is now available. It is on YouTube. So you can now see Albion in the Orient. It isn't a homage to their previous trip to Brisbane Road, but is, in fact, a tribute to their unbelievable trip to China. And I can't point you in the direction of this documentary enough. It is absolutely world class.
That is fantastic news. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that now. I know exactly what I'm going to be doing after this. And I would urge everyone and anyone, if you've never visited YouTube to see this, do it immediately. Go to YouTube and download it, even if it's to see a giant panda being pushed around in a baby's pram, playing a trumpet whilst it goes round in circles. I urge you to see the amazing trumpet playing giant panda. Chinese culture at its finest.
It is absolutely barnstorming. The documentary is every bit as good as I hoped it was. For those who aren't familiar with it, long story short, this was originally going to be England's preparation for the 1978 World Cup, which they didn't qualify for. But Millichap, who is the chairman of West Brom, I think volunteered West Brom to take their place. And this is a China which is coming back into society, wider society, I guess. So West Brom are the first British team ever to visit China, and they're accompanied with it. And the players there are absolutely, I mean, I think they do a great job, actually. There is, I can't imagine anything stranger than going on this tour. And there's a brilliant clip. The famous clip is probably John Truitt giving his slightly deadpan when he's seen one wall, we've seen them all, which he is joking. It is. But there's a great quote. They sort of about quite towards the end. It's going, but after a few days, or into the second week of touring, it's starting to take a bit of its toll. And there's a great quote from Brian Robson, who's with them at the time, saying, and he starts it with, "Yeah, I mean, last year we went to Alicante, and it wasn't great, but it's got sun and sea. I quite like sun and sea."
Yeah, and some of the gold stuff as well. I think Brian Robson liked a bit of that in his day.
So absolutely brilliant, and I can't really recommend a trip to go and look at that. So that is on YouTube. You can see that Albion in the Orient. We had an awful lot of fun at doing our QPR 1975 podcast a couple of weeks ago with Stu Burgess, and we sort of got cut off in our prime on a couple of things on there, in particular around a favourite topic of ours, which is outfield players having to go in goal. Now, we were talking about this because David Webb, who was part of that team, he didn't do this for QPR, but he gloriously, as far as I can tell, is the only player this has ever happened to. He actually started a game in goal for Chelsea. So a keeper gets injured quite late on. Steve Sherwood, third choice, can't come down in time. And so they begin with Dave Webb leading the team out. And I can only imagine the shock and surprise at various fans seeing Dave Webb leading the team out there. But we had a whole segment all lined up about outfield players going in goal, and we didn't want to waste it. It's a glorious topic, and of course, if there was any rule change I could make in football today, it would be to ban substitute goalkeepers being allowed on the bench. I don't think it's got anything to do with player burnout or concerns around that. I think it should be. I just think it's more fun an outfield player having to go in. They can never wear the gloves properly. They don't look right straight off. They never look right in the shirt. I don't know why it should be.
Yeah, it's true. The shirts never fit them, and also they never tuck them in, and they just look a bit scruffy. It's not mandatory for teams to have a goalkeeper on the bench, and there are some rare instances where football managers won't name a goalkeeper on the bench. I think now in the day and age where you've got 8, 9 substitutes across all of the leagues, it's quite easy to have 1 or 2 goalkeepers on the bench. But yeah, it is a rare occurrence. I can think of another team we've covered with the brilliant South Coast Jamie. We did his beloved Portsmouth when they got to win the FA Cup in 2008, I think it was, beating Cardiff City in the final. And in the quarter final, Portsmouth go to Old Trafford. Edwin van der Sar is the goalkeeper for the match day. He gets injured. Thomas Cruikshank has to go in goal to replace him. He gets sent off. And then Rio Ferdinand goes in goal for what is the decisive penalty kick, which I think was scored by Sully Montari, if memory serves. I kind of erased this from my memory because it really was a golden opportunity for United to go on and win another FA Cup, but they didn't. And full fair play to Portsmouth for doing it. But yeah, there is an instance there that I can think of straight away, Graham, where a goalkeeper that's been on the bench has been sent off. Therefore, your dream of having an outfield player in goal has happened, and it was Rio Ferdinand.
It does happen. In fact, I've been doing quite a lot of research on this, and I found there are so many rabbit holes to go down on this one, and I stumbled across this game. So this was Hereford v Colchester in 1993. Hereford v Colchester, Division 2 game at the time. Hereford go 1 up, then about a minute before half-time, Colchester's goalkeeper gets sent off. This is the odd thing. What they do, they then put the player manager at the time of Colchester, a chap called Roy McDonough. He goes in goal for the penalty. Chris Pike scores it. Hereford go 2 up. They get to half-time. They then make the substitution, and the reserve keeper comes on. Now, I am already questioning why Nathan Munson, who's the reserve keeper, why they decided, what part of it was, hey, should we make the change now whilst there's a penalty and we've got a reserve keeper on the bench, or should we not? But in his wisdom, Roy McDonough decides to go in goal. They make the change at half-time. Nathan Munson comes on. He extraordinarily also gets sent off. He gets sent off in about 10 minutes to go. And Roy McDonough has to go back in goal. So,
what a 90 minutes.
So I think this is definitely, certainly in English football, this is definitely the first time that 2 goalkeepers from the same side get sent off. I don't know, but it might be the first time that an outfield player goes in goal on 2 separate occasions in the same game. And this isn't a record, because we know Alvin Martin has the record, but Chris Pike scores a hat-trick against 3 different goalkeepers for Hereford. So, what a game.
Lightning striking twice. Who would have thought Alvin Martin would be joined in a very, very special club?
Yeah, it shouldn't happen, should it? It shouldn't happen in that. It should be really difficult. What I can also tell you, because once I started diving down this, Nathan Munson, who's the reserve keeper, it's one of 4 games that he plays for Colchester. So he doesn't go on to have a great career in that, but he does go on to receive he won the MBE in 2016 for services to the Home Office.
Wow. It's still happening though, Graham. There is a Wikipedia page absolutely dedicated to outfield players that go in goal. And up until this year, 2025, it's still happening somewhere across the world. And the great Pele had to do it for Santos once as well. So it is a special subject, I think, that we can return back to with some more obscure goalkeeping facts. I think the challenge for you and I really is to kind of find members to go in the David James Club when Stuart Pearce brought him on for Manchester City in a crucial league game to qualify for a UEFA Cup, I think it was, and put him up front, as we've discussed before. And I think we should discuss again and again and again.
And we can, of course. So there is somebody who I would put forward for that club, and I like to get an Oxford United reference in, and I've managed to get one in early on this one because Alan Fettis of Hull City, who I think plays Northern Ireland, I think he's Northern Ireland international keeper, but picked to the scene 1994 Hull City having something of an injury crisis, and up front in particular, and Oxford United under Dennis Smith riding relatively high at the time, has come to town, and the social players Hull, they put Fettis on the bench he could have gone in goal if needed, but as an outfield player. Dean Windass puts Hull City 2 up. Matt Elliott pulls one back for Oxford. It's a good side, that one. And with 10 minutes to go, Oxford chasing the goal. Hull City throw on Alan Fettis up front for the last 10 minutes. And sure enough, he scores. He scores the third goal to seal the win. So Alan Fettis not only made it onto the pitch, he scored against he scored against the mighty Oxford United, which is quite something.
That does seem to happen quite regular, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not an exclusive club. Fettis goes on. He plays mostly in goal for the rest of the season, largely. But Hull City's last game of the season, he does, in fact, start up front. And before you say and accuse Hull City of not taking the league seriously at that point, which would be a reasonable argument, but for the fact that Alan Fettis also scored the winner in that game. So Fettis scored 2 for Hull City. His only career goals, as it goes.
That's fantastic. What a club that is.
That is quite something. The list of players going in goal. It's interesting you mentioned Pele, because I was struck by how many sort of quite super famous players do it. I mean, Glenn Hoddle used to go. I think he was 3 times used to going quite regularly.
Yeah, wow.
A lot of big people. Bobby Moore. So Bobby Moore went in goal in a League Cup semi-final for West Ham against Stoke City. Saves a penalty in that one. Unfortunately for him, the rebound is put in and they are put out. But I will end my goalkeepers, outfield players in goal by surely the. I think obviously it's quite it's disappointing as an outfield player to have to play in goal in a semi-final. Scottish Cup final, Aberdeen v Rangers in 2000. This is Jim Leighton's last ever game. And Jim Leighton, a man who won't have particularly happy memories of cup finals either side of the border. In this one in particular, he doesn't. He gets injured after 2 minutes. Actually, quite a nasty one, and ends up with a broken jaw. So he gets taken off after 2 minutes. So Robbie Winters has to go in goal after 2 minutes of the Scottish Cup final. He had 2 minutes to dream of scoring the winner, and then he had 88 minutes trying to keep out Rangers, and they lost 4-0. Very sad.
Not a good goalkeeping debut.
So this was one. You can see why we couldn't fit this in the QPR one, because, and this is only scratching the surface of goalkeeping stories. This is just my research. I haven't even done your research.
Can you imagine if we the stuff we do cover and then leave out in the edit? Can you imagine if we had a full version, the unedited version? I mean, all of our listeners are gone immediately, aren't they? You'd have to block out a week.
But the other topic that we came up with, or we asked the question about, was, because of course in that QPR we had lots of footage of Phil Parkes without wearing goalkeeper gloves, begging the question, when did goalkeepers first wear gloves?
I think we mentioned at the time that it's quite an undefined answer to the question. It's a bit sketchy. So there are accounts at the beginning of football. William Sykes, a Scottish goalkeeper. There are pictures of him, photographs, I should say, not sketches. It was that long ago, where he is wearing gloves and he's the goalkeeper. So there's some kind of reference in the 1880s, goalkeepers were wearing gloves, but it didn't catch on. And then fast forward into the 1940s, player from a team that we've covered in season 1, episode 13, with the brilliant Phil Craig. And you probably have forgotten about this player, Graham, or this team potentially, because we got lost with our loving with Thomas Lipton, he of the tea fame, who went out to Italy to set up the first World Cup, which West Auckland won. We talked about River Plate, and River Plate had a goalkeeper, Emilio Caruso, who is credited as being the first goalkeeper to wear gloves on a regular basis. But again, this is all a bit sketchy. What we did say is that we believed it started catching on in the 70s and 80s, and that is the case. That's when sponsorship came in and goalkeepers were wearing gloves. Now, there are some strange occurrences. So Peter Shilton apparently refused to wear gloves in wet weather because he claimed it made his hands slippery.
Right. Okay.
I would have thought
the opposite.
You would have thought the opposite also, which is bizarre. Funny enough to say, though, he did adopt goalkeeper gloves and was starting to wear them. But yeah, our man as well, John Burridge, we talked about him. So John Burridge, we knew he had something to do with goalkeeper gloves. We know that he likes to wear his kit as he sits down to watch Match of the Day. In the 1970s and 80s, when goalkeepers' gloves were becoming more of a thing and sponsorship were getting involved and getting on the back of it, John Burridge used to sell them out the back of his van.
Oh. So is it possible that, my first pair of Sondicos with the kind of grippers on the knuckle could have been bought from John Burridge's van?
I think there's a strong possibility that they have been hand-me-downs from John Burridge's Derek Trotter. Grab 2 pairs for free.
Excellent. Well, we will keep you posted on more goalkeeping facts as we get them coming in. We are going to get on with the pod now. But before we do that,
it's almost like we have nothing to talk about when it comes to Dukla Prague.
Yeah. You've got the floor on Dukla Prague. You think I've been talking irrelevant stuff now? No, but in recent pods, you have been doing a very good job, Jamie, at setting a little teaser across the break. I'm going to set you a teaser. I mentioned him earlier, Roy McDonough. Any idea what record he holds, or purportedly holds? We will be back with the answer to that, and we will actually begin the Dukla Prague story in a minute. So we've been super busy in between these episodes. We have been trying to get a bit of video content for you from these podcasts and a nice, easy way for you to catch up on all our rankings in an easy form. Jamie, how does it work?
Yeah, I can tell you, Graham, that at least one person, me, is excited about this because we are launching our YouTube channel on the 10th of March. On that channel, you can find all of our audio episodes. You can also find some little short videos and also some long format videos where we get straight to the chase and you can see how and who and why we ranked a particular team the way we did. Ooh, that's so exciting.
Very much so. So stay tuned. You'll be able to find us on YouTube from the 10th of March. We will see you then. Okay, so welcome back, part 2. We are doing Dukla Prague. And for all those who spooled through to the Dukla Prague bit and skipped our bit, this next minute isn't going to make any sense. But we did leave you with a teaser there. What record does Roy McDonough, the famous Colchester United player manager who had 2 spells in goal in the same game, what record does he hold?
Well, I have to say, I prefer it when I ask the questions before we go into the break. I really haven't got a clue, and I wish I could come up with something. But I mean, I feel it's going to be something obscure. I'm not even sure it's going to be necessarily related to football.
Well,
I think it could sit outside the boundaries of football potentially.
If I tell you that and I've only I've only discovered this. I know it seems difficult to believe that we don't spend ages rehearsing this and researching it, but I only discovered this fact beforehand. I'm just going to... If I tell you that the name of Roy McDonough's autobiography is called Red Card Roy. So Roy McDonough...
No, he can't be rivaling our man from Colombia, Gerardo Bedoga, surely.
I don't know on what level and what leagues it is, but he received 22 red cards in the Football League. He's the record holder for the most dismissals in a career, 22, and for red cards in the Football League, 13, an enviable mark that he holds jointly with Steve Walsh. So I think from that, it's 22 red cards in total, 13 of them in the Football League.
There's two things with this that come straight to mind, sorry, Graham. Firstly, I'm relieved our man Gerardo Bedoya from Colombia, his 46 red cards in his career is safe, because I would have been gutted if that would have been beaten, because I've taken a liking to our man from Colombia. And also, I mean, peace of mind for you. It's not Mark Dennis.
Yes. Yeah, I need to look into this fact. I say fact in that it's come late to the party, because from what I can see, he only played 2 seasons out of the Football League. The guy had 9 red cards across 2 years in the conference. But anyway, 22 red cards and an autobiography called Red Card Roy. So there's definitely something in it. But there we go. I did promise we would start talking about Dukla Prague, and we are going to talk about Dukla Prague, whose colours you are proudly wearing there. Would that be home colours or away colours?
Yeah, no, I didn't wish for the away kit. I wished for the home kit, because I believe home kits are for Christmas only. So this is the home kit, and this is the classic. And do you know what, Graham? I have a question to put straight back to you. And maybe you can back this up with your research on this particular team. And just to clarify, we're talking Dukla Prague, the Czech team, the Czechoslovakian team, I should say, between the period 1960 and 1967. It's a golden period for them, as we're just about to find out. But is this a football team where the kit is more famous than the team itself?
I think there is an argument of that. Certainly to our minds, there is a semi kind of reason for that, isn't there? Because they didn't actually exist for the first 40 years of my life, or 30 years of my life, or a whole period of time, maybe not that long, but there was a whole 20-year period where Dukla Prague don't exist, and actually the Dukla Prague that does exist now is a kind of reinvention or version 2 in some way. So I suppose in that way, because they don't really have a current history, maybe there is even more of a case for the kit being actually what's more famous about them. For those who aren't familiar, we should probably flag that the kit is so famous from the Half Man Half Biscuit song. All I Want for Christmas is the Dukla Prague away kit. From their, I think that one's from the Trumpton Riots EP. That's from the Back in the DHSS album. Great titles, Half Man, Half Biscuit. Well, come on. Let's talk about, should we talk about the club first before we talk about the, otherwise we won't talk about anything, any of the team at all. So Dukla Prague are an interesting side. They are essentially a state team, aren't they? Are they the state army team?
They are, yeah. They were formed in 1948 after the Second World War had finished. Czechoslovakian football was growing at that particular moment. And as was commonplace in the 1940s, the 50s and the 60s through to the late 1980s into the 90s, army and police teams in European countries was common practice. You know, teams from Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Russia, Bulgaria, Romania would have had state-run teams. And we know from our time with Pavel, when we talked about Gornik Zabza, who pop up in this story with Dukla Prague, a rare occurrence. We know that when you're an army team, you can pick the players you want. There are the players, there's no transfer fees involved. If you want players, you find a way to get the players, you employ them into the army or the police, and they become your players. And you see this with Dukla Prague in this particular era. So coming into the 1960s, which is their golden period that we're going to talk through, they have a lot of players that are established. One of the most famous footballers ever to play the game, a graceful footballer, beautiful footballer. There's videos of him on YouTube, and that's Josef Masopust, an absolute Rolls Royce of a footballer. Just watching some of his black and white highlights on YouTube, you can see there is a graceful superstar there, a Ballon d'Or winner. So he would have been with Dukla Prague for pretty much most of his career, as would many of the players at that time. The only thing that would change on a not so regular basis would have been the coach, the manager, which happens in this particular team. They go for a couple of coaches, but they still maintain their glory through the 60s.
Now, it's interesting you should talk about Masopust?
Josef Masopust. Yeah, Masopust. I would say, but I mean, we're wrong.
Yeah, and I can't remember your exact wording for it, but you basically said, somebody that would be familiar to us. But he's not familiar to me at all in any way whatsoever. I don't know where I was during this, because I think when I look back, I think I know, you know your Puscases and your Savios and your Pelés and all these various bits, but I don't know him at all. So, and yet, one of the stars of the 1962 World Cup and Ballon d'Or winner, as you say. I mean, he's a big name. He's a big star, isn't he? But is he the biggest star that nobody's ever heard of?
Some people have heard of him. Only one Czechoslovakian player has won the Ballon d'Or, and that is Josef Masopust, and he won it in 1962 when Czechoslovakia got to the final of the World Cup. So Czechoslovakia went to the World Cup. They're in the same group with Brazil and Spain. The format back then, Graham, you'll be pleased to know, in the 1962 World Cup was sensible. 4 groups of 4 teams, 16 teams in the final. They play each other once. The top 2 go through to a quarterfinal. It's a straight knockout from there. FIFA be insane.
That will never last. Bin that one off.
It didn't last. They did bin it off. Masopust was one of Dukla Prague, just to give the context, in the 1962 World Cup, they had 7 players in the Czechoslovakian team. So they were well represented. It's probably worth pointing out one of those was a backup goalkeeper to the number 1 in the team, but they were well represented, Dukla Prague, in the national team. A national team went all the way to the final. They beat the Hungarians in the quarterfinals. They beat the Yugoslavians in the semi-final, and they lost 3-1 to Brazil in the final. A Pelé-less Brazil, Pelé-less Brazil, but they did have the rather wonderful Garrincha. But yeah, in 1962, with Garrincha and Pelé getting to the World Cup final, well, without Pelé, Josef Masopust won the Ballon d'Or and is the only Czechoslovakian player to win it. Since then, another Czech player has won it, Pavel Nedved, in the late 90s or early 2000s, when I think he was at Juve, but I could be wrong there. But so he's a superstar, Graham, and I forgive you for not knowing about him.
Well, I did think something had gone wrong with my global football knowledge, which regular listeners to the podcast will know I'm maybe on more comfortable territory with lower league Yeovil players than I am World Cup winners of the 1960s. But but I was a little embarrassed to because I don't think I'd ever come across him. And I suppose that's another thing. So Czech football actually is football in Czechoslovakia is very big at this stage, isn't it? Actually, as a nation, they are pretty successful. In fact, go on being successful off and on over a whole period. But a lot of Dukla Prague's success is domestic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So their golden period was the 1960s, but they did win championships, a couple of championships, Czech championships, in the 1950s, and then they won a couple more in the 1970s. But in the 1960s, they do dominate, and they pick up 5 league championships and 2 doubles in that period. And the league system in Czechoslovakia is fairly sensible. It's 16 teams. It's a small country. You're right, Graham. Czechoslovakian football was incredibly strong. The national team has done incredibly well. We featured a couple of their teams before, actually, the Czech Republic in 96 and the Panenka brilliance of 1976, when Czechoslovakia actually won the UEFA European Championships. But Dukla Prague are carving out a bit of a reputation for themselves of getting to the European Cup on a regular basis because they're winning championships. And the European Cup is fairly new in the 1960s. So the club are featured they're getting a bit of profile in the tournament because they are making their way through the early knockout phases and getting to the latter part of the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely, and they are making some progress in those European tournaments. I think do they get to a couple of semi-finals?
They make one semi-final. They are one of only 2 Czechoslovakian teams to ever make it to a European Cup semi-final, and they do that in 1967, and that's the last time they feature in the European Cup during the 1960s, because then they fail to win a league championship until the mid-1970s after that, by which point the European Cup has really taken on a different shape. I can tell you that in context, because I've done some data on this. So Czechoslovakia, as a footballing nation, would have competed in the European Cup. They didn't enter in 1956, but in 1957 they did. That was their first entry. And then they play right through to 1993, which is the very first ever Champions League. And at that point, politically, there's a few things going on in Central Europe, and Czechoslovakia is split into 2 countries from that point. So I can tell you between 1957 and 1993, there are 37 entrants into the European Cup. Almost 70% of the teams, the Czech teams that featured in the European Cup during that period, would have exited the tournament by losing by the second round. There's only 27% of teams that would have qualified for the quarterfinals and better, and only 5% of the teams from Czechoslovakia qualified for the semifinals, and that's 2 occasions. And Dukla Prague are one of them. And they lose to Celtic in 1967. And Celtic in 1967 are a pretty decent team, probably worth talking about at some point. We seem to steer clear of the proper good teams, and that is a proper good team. They go on and win it.
Very successful in the league, but you mentioned they win the double a couple of times, and I think they really take ownership of the Czech Cup, the alternative of the FA Cup over there, which I think only begins in 1961, and they seem to win it most years.
They win. I think they win it 3 times. I've got here. I could be wrong.
I think they win 4. They reached 6 finals and win 4 of them in the 60s, I think.
Okay, yeah. So your data is more reliable than mine. I've got 5 finals and 3 victories, so I've clearly missed one out. Yes, so you've probably got better data than me, Graham.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised by that.
Nor would I. So they actually win the double. The first cup they win, and they win the league at the same time in the same season. And they win the league by 7 clear points in 1961 to a team from Bratislava. And they have some amazing results. They're unbeaten at home, and they actually do beat Sparta Tavana. Might be wrong on the pronunciation there. 10-1, which is a result I know you're going to love.
Very definitely. That's very good. The Czech Cup might be a tournament they're successful in, but it isn't the tournament that they really are successful in. And it's an unlikely one, and it blends in with one of our other favourite themes we have, for some reason, we keep talking about, which is the very, very early days of football in America. So before the North American Soccer League, which is before what happened, what we've got now. There's a tournament or a league system that runs in the early 60s, the ISS, and this isn't US football as such, is it? It's just football in the Americas?
Yeah, it goes under a couple of names. I know it as the American Challenge Cup.
I think it's the International Soccer League in some way.
Which makes more sense, because that's essentially what it is. It's the brainchild from a guy called William Cox, who would be the Philadelphia Eagles owner, I think, as well. So again, another, like a Lamar Hunt, somebody in the 1950s and 60s that has a bit of resources, but also is a sports enthusiast. Now, he has this brainchild in 1960, and it's probably worth pointing out that there's this other international tournament called the Intercontinental Cup that starts in 1960, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But William Cox has this idea in 1960 that the best football clubs in the world should come together in the summer in the United States to take part in what would be a World Club Cup. Now, that's an idea that's never going to happen and never going to catch on.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Who'd be trying to do something like that?
Yeah, only a fool in charge of a major football organization would be trying to capitalize on the club tournament and not sticking to their bread and butter of world football tournament. Yeah, so Infantino, he wants to have a World Club tournament this summer in the United States with 32 teams. And it's going to happen, I think. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and whether it is something that catches on or whether it is something that doesn't catch on. With the idea of players playing all through the year, it's going to have a debate around it. But William Cox in North America already had this idea in the 1960s. And this tournament that you referenced, Graham, the American Challenge Cup or the International Cup, runs for 6 editions in the 1960s, and it runs concurrently with the Intercontinental Cup that's being played as well, which is the competition, the World Club competition between the champions of Europe versus the champions of South America, deemed the only football nations at the time worthy of such a competition. And this tournament is taking place in the New York area every summer from 1960 through to 1965. But it does have a really strange format, Graham. I don't know if you've seen this.
Definitely, by the end, it has a strange format, because from 1961, I think, when Dukla Prague, they're invited and they win the first tournament, the second version of it, but their first one in 1961, they beat Everton something like 9-2 on aggregate, which seems a bit surreal. And from that point on, that tournament then becomes the winner plays Dukla Prague.
Yes, that's the strange format. So by virtue of winning it, they are automatically given a place in the final for the next year's editions, where up to 14 teams will have to compete to play them.
It's kind of like winner stays on at pool, isn't it?
It really is, actually. Yeah. Although I think Dukla Prague did have to come back to Czechoslovakia. They didn't stay in New York for their duration. But I think they win 4 in a row, don't they, of this particular tournament?
Yes, they have a tremendously successful rate and run in it. They play in every final that they subsequently are in. They beat.
I'm glad you're doing this.
The team called America. I don't know. They must be from Rio de Janeiro. A Brazilian side in '62. West Ham in '63. Another team in '64. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that.
A Polish team.
The Polish team in '64, and then they actually do fail to win in '65, the final year of the tournament, when they lose to Polonia by Tom. You see, I'm not afraid of pronouncing my Polish name.
And obviously that's the final edition. So what's brilliant about Polonia Bytom, who now play in, I think, in the second tier of Polish football, they have the very proud distinction, like Leeds United, where they can boast they are still the holders of the America Challenge Cup. Like Leeds United can still boast being the Intercities Fairs Cup holders, which they are.
It's very good. So the success doesn't last, does it? And that seems to be sort of connected maybe to it being decoupled from the army and maybe having to compete and not being able to get whatever players they want, perhaps. Is that an unfair view?
It's not an unfair view. It's slightly inaccurate because their demise really begins in the late 1980s when communism in Czechoslovakia is starting to erode and the country itself is changing its identity. So they do compete for championships in the 1970s and the cups, and they do win them. It's worth pointing out that they win 4 league championships in a row from 1960-61 through to 1963-64. Then they have a dip. They finish 8th in a League of 16, and then they come back as champions again in 1965-66, and then they go on in 66-67 to get to the semi-finals of the European Cup, a massive achievement for a Czechoslovakian team. But they are competing with bigger teams in Prague, Sparta Prague, Slovenia Prague, Slovan Bratislava, and also, incredibly, the team they stuffed 10-1 in 1961, Spartak Trnava, actually go on and win quite a number of championships themselves in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So Dukla Prague are by no means the biggest team in Czechoslovakia. There are other teams that can claim to be bigger and more successful, and Sparta Prague definitely being the heavyweights of the Czechoslovakian league. So there's an argument that Dukla Prague are punching above their weight through the 1960s when they are amassing these championships. And they're doing this with Josef Masopust in the team. There's no coincidence that 8 of the 11 championships that Dukla Prague have won, Josef Masopust has been a key member of the football team. So you've got this incredible player, this central figure in the midfield, which is instrumental to its football club. And when Masopust moves on and actually takes over as coach for a short time as well, in fact, the coaches come back and forth. It's a bit yo-yo-y. It's, the coaches leave, then come back, then leave, then come back again. There's this kind of repetition that seems to happen in the Czech league. It's no coincidence when you lose your best player, when your best player retires, suddenly you're not as strong as you once were. And they do slowly go on this demise until the early 1990s when Czechoslovakia splits. We get the Czech Republic and we get Slovakia. And Dukla Prague in the very first season of the new Czech League, the 92-93 season, finish dead last and get relegated.
They get spectacularly relegated. Derby County fashion, in fairness. Just the one win after 30 games. 8 draws, 10 points. If you're going to go down in style.
Yeah, and they did. They did go down in style, and they never recovered as well. So it is a road to ruins. By the mid-1990s, they are suffering bankruptcy, and then they find themselves in a very Wimbledon-esque style, being merged with a different football team, 35, 40 kilometers away from Prague, called Pribám.
So they are now back, aren't they? Is that right? They have, or is it a kind of an MK Don situation?
It's an MK Don situation. So there is a team now that do play in the colours of Dukla Prague, that do play in the stadium of Dukla Prague, and do play in the top Czech league as FK Dukla Prague. But it's not the Dukla Prague that we're talking about now. It's a team that themselves have come through the lower leagues with investment. And obviously, I think marketing opportunities, as we've mentioned, the shirt is incredibly popular. So, why wouldn't you want to bring back to life this incredible historic football team? And that's what happened. And whilst in the English Football League, we find club identity fairly consistent, and not many of us find ourselves in situations where our club will be rebranded as, I don't know, say Thames Valley Royals or something crazy like that. In the Czech league and in other leagues, it's not that uncommon. It does happen, and team identity does change. Team names do change.
So you mention the kit and you mention the marketing appeal. So we should touch on this. So, the reason this is Dukla Prague have a fame that far outlives its achievement, certainly in our lifetime, is the Half Man Half Biscuit song, and it is lyrically it is fantastic, because any song that references in quite some detail the disaster of trying to play Scare-Electrics and Sabutio and crowbars in a reference of the Dukla Prague away shirt, that is something special, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you had me at Sabutio. Absolutely. The amount of hours I must have whiled away playing Sabutio and loving it, setting up leagues on the council estate that I grew up on. Absolutely love it. Yeah, and any reference to Sabutio, you've got my attention.
Surely the Undertones, My Perfect Cousin, when he flicked a kick, I think it is. I'll dig out the proper lyric.
Well, I mean, Sabutio does have that cultural significance for a generation multiple generations. I mean, it's still a massive game now. The World Cup of Sabutio took place in 2024 in Tunbridge, Wales. The countries from Spain, Greece, Italy, the United States, Brazil all compete. Sabutio is one of those kind of cultural things that just doesn't surface its way to the top, but there's still, to this day and age, a lot of people taking part in Sabutio, and Sabutio is big business in the very, very small corners of the world.
The reference in the Half Man Half Biscuit song of having to play with a headless striker is just too good.
Goalkeeper with no arms.
Yeah. It's too good. I was trying to think of equivalents. So obviously, music and football is very closely linked from one form or another, and you can find lots of references either to footballers or football clubs within it. The song I thought was probably closest or most relevant to this one is the theme from Sparta FC by The Fall. So this works on many levels. Mostly, obviously, The Fall very much John Peel's other favourite band, even more so. And it's a curious song. Marky Smith, when he wrote it, is trying to, without any knowledge of Greek football, he's a Manchester City fan, without any particular knowledge of Greek football, he was trying to write a song as to what it must be like to support a Greek football team because of the passion. But you may not think you know the theme from Sparta FC, but actually is probably The Fall's most recognisable song, arguably, because it was used as the opening theme music to Final Score, the early 2000s or so, to the extent there was obviously someone on the production team, whether it was Ray Stubbs or not, I don't know, somebody on the production team was obviously a big Fall fan, and they actually get Marky Smith in to read the classified results. It's a very entertaining clip. I can't recommend it enough. I did a tiny bit of extra research on this because I like The Fall, but I'm not a specialist on The Fall, and I was curious as to whether the notoriety and the popularity of the song in the mainstream, how it went down in amongst Fall regular fans. And I'm indebted, my friend Niall pointed me in the direction of an excellent book on The Fall by Steve Pringle, who points out that the theme from Sparta FC is in fact the second most played live song by The Fall. So there you go. They didn't reject it after all. Of course, I think probably people of our era, of our vintage, Jamie, would remember the pomp of Final Score in the 80s. And I don't know if you remember this, because I think this is... I remember the point at which, and you got Des Lynam doing his brilliant thing, and we always used to do, once they'd done the classified check and done everything like that, they would do the headlines, and I remember they'd cut some music over the top, off the back of it. And for many years, they would do the theme from Miami Vice.
Yes.
So they'd play the theme from Miami Vice, and then Des Lynam would go, Mark Haley struck twice for Coventry City as they came back from a goal down to beat Aston Villa.
Yeah.
the other song I do closely remember with them doing that as well was Bruce Hornsby and the Range. That's just the way it is. They definitely used that one as well. So I'm sure they used others, and I think it probably depends what your vintage of final score is. But that, for me, is the years.
That is a fantastic musical reference where football is playing a big part. And if I can just give you the anti-reference to that, I don't know where you sit on this. So, I mean, we were talking, this started by us talking about the kit, Dukla Prague's away kit, and its life and legacy beyond the team. I think the song he talks about, Half Man Half Biscuit, was late 80s when they brought that out. And then in the 2000s and 10s, I can't remember what it was, the Conservative government were in power, or I think it was when the United Kingdom was in a coalition. And Damien Green, Conservative politician, he turned up at the Latitude Music Festival wearing the Dukla Prague away kit.
Oh,
now,
gosh.
It either got the attention he was looking for or wasn't looking for, because something you reference as almost your point of reference for research, the Guardian newspaper did a feature on Damien Green wearing the Dukla Prague away kit at the Latitude Festival. So, I mean, the football team itself has been dead from, I think it's 2013, 2014. The football team itself has been dead and gone for almost 20 years. And then you've got a English politician wearing this particular shirt at a music festival in the height of the English summer.
That is fantastic. Even better, the Guardian's caption, probably headline on it, Half Minister, Half Biscuit.
Oh, it's so typical of you to love a headline.
Half Minister, Half Biscuit. Very good, very good. I think that shows the reach of Dukla Prague and its cultural significance, and actually quite a hugely successful side. But Jamie, how do we rank them in terms of greatness? As a reminder, we have 5 categories of greatness, from all-time greats to true greats, touch greatness in the middle, edge of greatness, blinkered greats, and our bonus category. Not necessarily great, but without them we wouldn't be where we are today. That might be. I don't know. What do you think, Jamie? Where do you go?
Well, I can see where you're going. So let me try to steer us away from that.
Yeah.
Back to the football. This team won 5 championships in an 8-year period between 60 and 67, which is the period of the team we're talking about. They won 2 doubles, we think, maybe 3, depending on which one of us has done the right research. In that period of time, I can tell you that their league win ratio was 55.5%. It's not bad. They had an 8th place position where they didn't win many games that particular season. So that drags it down from what would have been around about 63, 64% if consistency was in play for across those all 7 seasons. In the European Cup, they get to the quarterfinal or better on the 5 occasions they compete, apart from 1, where they lose to Gornik Zabrze in the first round after drawing the first game. After drawing the replay, they lose on a, can you guess?
Oh, coin toss.
They lose on a coin toss. Gornik Zabrze, those coin tossers. They did it to Roma and they've done it to Dukla Prague.
Wow. I didn't realise Gornik Zabrze had such form for this.
I tell you what, they must have been doing a lot of coin toss, tossing through the 1960s. They did make the semi-final, Dukla Prague as well, and it's worth pointing out when they were losing out some decent teams. They lost in 1958. It's a little bit beforehand, but they lost in the first round to the Manchester United Busby Babes in 1958. Quite a significant year for that particular team. So from a football perspective, domestically, they win 5 championships. They're a 55.5% win ratio. Their European record during those 5 seasons is also 55.5%. 0.5% win ratio. They play 29, they win 16, they lose 7. So they've done all right in Europe. And then they do win championships again. In the 80s, they do get to another European semi-final, this time in the Cup Winners' Cup. They get to the Cup Winners' Cup semi-final. So there's a little bit of legacy in terms of what they do off the field before their incredible and unfortunate financial demise where their identity is taken from them and rehashed. But they have the legacy of a football kit, and that's quite a key factor. I think when your football kit lives longer than you, something must be good about either you or the football kit. So I'm going to kick us off. I'm going to say that Dukla Prague, 1960 to 67, were on the edge of greatness.
Yeah, I think you're right to steer us into a grouping. I was thinking we wouldn't be where we are today, which is Tory ministers appearing at Latitude Festival in a random Czech away shirt. But, maybe the world's better for all of that. But you have to go back to the football. I don't like to agree with you, but I think there's really not much option. But because you can't go beyond edge because they are undoubtedly. I mean, they're a funny team, aren't they? Because they have a lot going in their favour during that early period. They've obviously got the pick of the players. So they automatically get to the final of this American tournament. Equally, they actually aren't giants in any way, and they end up. As a relatively small side in their local league, in their league as it goes. So, I don't think it's all gifted to them, but I think without actually doing it at a bigger, they're okay in European football. They do all right, but we had Panathinaikos on the other week, and they got to the final of the European Cup. That is what would take them up a notch. So I think for all the glory of their kit and their cultural significance, we have to say Dukla Prague, edge of greatness. Excellent. So we did have something to talk about with them.
Well, it felt that way, yeah. And yeah, hopefully it's worth listening back to. But just in case we need more filler, and I think it's only right that we started with superstars. We should end with superstars because you referenced that Stan Bowles had the lowest recorded score. Now, I don't want to spoil it for you, Graham, but I don't know if you've seen, there is a wonderful website out there called thesuperstars.org where
I think I have, yes.
somebody has wonderfully documented its entire history. It is a resource extravaganza. It's fantastic.
It's not new to me. I am aware of this, as you might imagine, with enjoying my my Superstars obsession. Yes,
and you mentioned in that Superstars obsession that Stan Bowles had a bit of a dislike or a bit of a rivalry for Malcolm McDonald.
Indeed.
And in the 1976 edition, I don't know if we covered this, but there were 10 competitors. Stan Bowles did finish last with 7 points. Picking up 4 points in the swimming was his best event, where there were only 4 competitors. He came third out of 4, and that was his best event. Malcolm McDonald finished with 16 points in 8th position, although 10 of those points was gathered in the 100-meter dash, as it was called, where Malcolm McDonald did it in a very impressive 11 seconds flat. Stan Bowles, 12.6 seconds.
What I like about the casting of that is it's not obvious out of all. On the one hand, it's brilliant because actually it's what the title says it is. It's Stan Bowles is a superstar. He should be on it. But, if you wanted a hard-working somebody who's really going to put a shift in the gym test, is really going to chuck themselves into it and not be there for a good time. There are other players you could have picked other than Stan Bowles, but
well, I can tell you in that edition, because I don't know if you remember this, with Superstars back in its heyday, it had 10 events. And you, as the competitive, would only participate in 8 events. Now, if you were affiliated with the sport that was in there, which there was a soccer event, you couldn't participate. So Stan Bowles had one event that he had to opt out of because he wasn't allowed to take part in the soccer events. I wonder if you can guess what that one event was that he opted out of.
Yeah, I think it was the gym test, wasn't it?
It was the gym test.
Okay, well, there will be more on Superstars to come, no doubt about that. But we will leave it there for now. Jamie, thank you as ever.
Thank you. It's always nice to try to find details about a team where we started about having absolutely nothing to talk about. But hey, we got to talk about a kit, which is fantastic.
Always a priority.
And Sabutio.
Sabutio. What more could you want? Excellent. That's it for this week. We will be back again next time.